Let's talk about creating a better food future. And that's what we're going to spend the next hour doing. And I am so thrilled to have this group of panelists up here that are both disruptors with mainstream organizations, great amount of expertise and wisdom based on their past experience. I'd like to welcome you. My name is Cathy Burns. I am the CEO of the Produce Marketing Association. We are the only global trade association that represents fruits, vegetables, and florals. So I get up every day thinking about how to inspire people to eat more fruits and vegetables, and that's pretty cool. I spent my first 30 years in grocery retail, so thrilled to be with you. And why don't I turn it over to Carla to get us started with intros.
Thank you, Cathy.
Shut the door so we can hear.
Yeah.
Somebody,
AJ, can you get that door when you get a chance?
Right,
Thanks.
perfect.
Thank you, AJ.
Well, thank you to the Milken team for welcoming me to be a part of this. This is my first year, so I'm a little nervous. Okay. I'm Carla Vernon. I'm the president of the Natural and Organic Operating Unit at General Mills, and we have about $1 billion worth of natural and organic brands at General Mills, including brands you know and love like Annie's and Cascadian Farm, Epic Provisions, Muir Glen Organic Tomatoes, Larabar, beautiful brands like that. And I've been at General Mills for 20 years.
Thanks, Cathy. Again, happy to be back at Milken. I was here last year and recognize some of you. My name is Uma Valeti. I'm a CEO, co-founder of a company called Memphis Meats. I'm a cardiologist by training and started this company about 3 years ago. And what we do is really produce meat directly from animal cells without growing the animal. So it's animal protein, and we've done meat, poultry, and seafood.
Great, thanks. Walter?
Yeah, my name is Walter Robb. Grocer for 40 years, the last 30 with Whole Foods Markets, co-CEO, till we sold to Amazon in 2017, something you may have heard about. And since then, I'm doing a lot of speaking, investing, working as an executive in residence at S2G, who's here at the conference, and also my own little Stonewall Robb outfit.
Great, Matt.
Matt Barnard, Plenty, and at Plenty what we've been doing is we've been developing a series of technologies to bring the farm inside. So we impose full control on the growing environment, the production environment for plants, and in so doing we have been able to change the set of choices available in that we now get to choose both optimum flavor and optimum yield as opposed to having to trade off between one or the other. So we are focused on nutrient-rich food, or fruits and vegetables in other words, that taste not just better but completely different than what people are used to, because we believe if people are going to be healthier, this stuff needs to be craveable.
Great. So part of creating a great future food world is to be able to feed it. And we hear a lot about 9.8 billion people by 2050. But we often don't talk about the makeup of what that demographic is going to look at, whether it's, and there's going to be economic disparity, obviously multicultural communities, single-family families, single one-parent families. The diversity of that is pretty extreme. So I'd be curious to hear, how do you think we are going to feed this ever-growing population with not only healthy food, but what's healthful for the planet from a sustainability standpoint? So, Walter, you want to kick us off?
Sure, be happy to. First of all, I want to say that question of we're feeding 9 or 10 billion people, you hear both numbers, is often used as a justification for doing certain things, and I wish it wouldn't be. We have to do it this way because of that number, and therefore we can't do these things. We can't do organic because it will never get us there. And the fact is the only way we're going to get there is by using a variety or a tool shed of different modalities and ways to get there, and all sorts of folks to do it. So when somebody says that, I always make sure it's coming from a place of inclusion and a wide lens, as opposed to this sort of justification for a particular set of technologies or sort of approach. That being said, we're going to get there. The backdrop for me, and then is that I've never seen an inflection moment in the food and agriculture business like I see right now. I think we are coming to the end of the production agriculture as we've known it since World War II, which came out of the production of pesticides and fertilizers. Those tools are reaching their limits. They're being replaced by a new set of botanicals, a new set of technologies that are enabling. And James Rogers is here from Appeal. I happen to be I think, James, can you stand up just so folks, you got to know this guy.
James.
You got to know this guy. This guy is amazing, what he does. If you don't know about Appeal, check it out. But we're enabling all sorts of new possibilities for how people can be fed, and this is a remarkable opportunity in time. And so we're going to feed them indoors, outdoors, every which way. including whether what Uma's doing, or what Mark is doing, or what Carla's doing, and those choices are really just unfolding.
And what are you most surprised about in this new future?
Well, I want to say what I'm most
Or
excited
excited.
about is that I heard all the time as we were building Whole Foods that to feed people, to feed the 10 billion people, we have to dominate nature. What's happening now is we're articulating the philosophy to feed 10 billion people. We're going to work with nature to do that. We're going to solve these problems in new ways. That's a whole philosophy akin to the philosophy we had building Whole Foods around a wholesome set of choices. So I think that's exciting. The biggest surprise is how fast it's happening. It is happening lightning fast. And if you're involved in any of these companies and you're not moving around the corner, you're just too slow.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Carla, let's shift over to you. Big multinational company. Curious what your perspective is on what conversations are you having? What are you driving to feed the future?
Well, I'm a mom, and I have an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. And when I heard the statistic or the fact that said we may only have as many as 60 harvest cycles left of topsoil in the agriculture system, I immediately start thinking about my own children and your own children and grandchildren, and thinking like, this is urgent. This is an urgent situation, and technology needs to be not only digital and the computer age, but at General Mills, we believe we have a role where technology is about evolving how we treat the soil and really changing our approach and changing our tactics and techniques. So we've become very invigorated and invested behind the concept of regenerative agriculture, because at General Mills, you know, every store you can think of, from a Whole Foods to your corner store to a bodega, you can buy a box of Cheerios. So I'm really hopeful about the impact of if a company that can get granola bars in every backpack and cereal in every bowl decides to change how it interacts with the land, that we can make a big difference there on how we can appropriately have nutrient-rich, nutrient-dense food for people. But Walter brought up another interesting topic, and that is that we don't only have to worry about how we will manufacture new food. We have to make sure we're not wasting the food we're making, right? And the food we're growing. And so at General Mills, we're so excited because we're supporting investments in similar technologies. We're sponsoring an organization, I like to call it the Uber of food waste. So it's called Meal Connect, and it's a technology that lets things like airports and that food service cafeteria in your work office identify food that's about to expire, from which the people who are there every day won't want to eat it. You know how you go to the airport and you see that tuna sandwich and it's like, ooh, expires tomorrow. But it's not expiring tomorrow. It's still perfectly good to eat. And we're
Maybe.
Yeah, it depends.
At the airport.
maybe not the
Some
tuna.
rough
Maybe
stuff
don't go
over
with the
there,
tuna.
man.
The roast beef. I'm going to go with the roast beef. And then we can identify those organizations that are feeding people on a daily basis and put that gap and that opportunity together.
Great. Okay. Matt, what do you think about all this?
Well, at first I'll say I very much agree with what Walter was saying, in that there is no panacea. We need multiple modes of production. And relative to what Carla was saying, one of the main things that we're working on to help solve, to make our contributions at Plenty, is the high-calorie, low-nutrient diet is the thing that is leading to pandemics around the globe, like obesity and diabetes. And one of the main barriers to a high-nutrient diet, as opposed to a high-calorie diet, is the fact that nutrient-rich food, by and large, is perishable food. And so we are working to make what has been perishable food much less perishable, or with much more shelf life, and to be craveable. Because as you look at the consumption of nutrient-rich foods around the planet, you see massive stratification across the income deciles, where the highest income deciles are consuming 3 to 5x more than the lowest income deciles. And this is not, as you might think, solely because of price. In fact, the stronger predictive variable is, in fact, perishability, because if you cannot afford to throw away your money, and I say it that way on purpose, you do not buy perishable product. And tests have been run where they have proven if you take perishability out of the purchase consideration, you drive percentage of cart into nutrient-rich food, which is fruits and vegetables. And so that's what we're working to do. We're getting weeks, plural, of additional shelf life off of our product at Plenty, and have been working with our flavor team and sensory team to make it craveable. And so we're getting people telling us in sensory, hey, don't call that kale, because all I know is I don't like that stuff. So why am I going to look for Plenty kale on the shelf? Call it something else. So that's what we're working on at Plenty.
Can I just tag in?
Yeah.
The government programs, basically SNAP 80, whatever the numbers are, they're also tied, it's an interesting point, to non-perishable. In other words, their cadence is twice a month. So there's no way, if you're using that benefit, that you're going to be able to buy perishable foods. You're going to buy, and what in fact does buy in those lower income zip codes, where they don't have access to fresh food, is they buy the processed food, which allows them to get their calories met through the entire month. So if we talk about system change here, we're talking about thinking about how the government supports the purchasing of those sorts of foods.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're going to come back to the marketing of that in just a second. Uma, what's your part in all this?
Yeah, well, look, Memphis Meats, or the company like ours, has not existed in the world before. But the product has existed for thousands of years, and humanity has evolved by eating animal protein and plants, right? And there's a lot of innovation going on in plant-based space, like Matt and other companies. Now, what's happening in the animal space is really interesting, because you talk about 10 billion people, but the more important number is what drives that. So there's 7 billion people right now, and there's 70 billion animals or 80 billion animals that are driving that consumption. If you think about doubling the demand, and there's a very big, obvious thing that's staring in our face, where there's a demand and supply mismatch, unless you make 70 billion animals become 150 billion animals, and that's talking about enormous resources that we don't have. So what does that mean? That means we either take away a choice of eating meat from people, and right now meat's still a relatively prominent, developed country, consumed good, right? But if you really want this to be affordable and available, like meat for everyone everywhere, you got to start thinking about how agriculture has always done, continues to find new technologies to continue to grow and bring more food and preserve choice. I don't think the world is going to say, I'm going to ration meat, or going to say that the price is going to be increased. We have to find ways of producing it much cheaper. That's where Memphis Meats really believes that when you think about the fundamental principles of what we're doing, we take high-quality animal cells. Everything starts from a cell. These cells go inside an animal is slaughtered, but before slaughter, it's living a life. Those cells in an animal are doing a lot of other things than becoming meat for food. What we do is we take these cells outside the animal, we're feeding them with very high-quality nutrients, the same thing a baby calf would eat. But all we need was those cells to do is to become meat. And that happens in 3 to 4 weeks. And we harvest. And then you cook just like you cook. So look at the efficiency of how much shorter time to feed, as well as really trying to find the types of food that are good for health or wellness, or the types of products that you want for taste or texture. Your ability to find these cells and being able to take this out into market just explodes enormously. Like, the comparison is, to breed a certain trait into an animal, it takes 5 to 7 years. For our cells, we can start selecting cells very early. Like, these cells are doubling every 24 hours or 18 hours. There's an ability to kind of track them and figure out what you need. Just the possibilities are limitless. But you put a product on the plate. You're not taking a choice away, but you suddenly open up the ability to continue to innovate. Whether it starts off in a premium category, because there's a lot of technology that has to be developed as we scale. But we think about this as things that could scale: local, regional, national, almost addressing things like water shortage, food security. So this is a long runway for this whole industry to go for the next 50, 100 years.
And what do you think remains sacred in that whole process?
Really, really key, because fundamentally, like I said, humanity has evolved growing meat and eating meat and plants. And the ability to preserve your choices of local culture are some of our guiding principles. And if you think about this, very similar to the organic movement, which evolved as like a niche movement, people really deeply care about where their food comes from, if they're preserving their culture. And I think respecting that is some of the founding principles that we have. And being able to communicate what we're doing early is also important. So, we're a startup, we're 3-year-old, so like infants, right? But from the day that we founded the company, we started talking about our work very openly, because people have to get used to it, understand it, ask the questions, and it's not for everybody when it comes out. So I think respecting that and recognizing that, when we are at scale, people will be walking through our meat production units and be able to see the whole process. And like Matt said, he's bringing the whole process to be indoors, right? We can say from the first cell all the way to growing the meat, harvesting and cooking, it can happen under one roof. And look at the simplification of logistics there. So it makes a lot of sense to say this would be local, regional, or global, in a way that food culture should be.
Yeah. Matt, how would you answer that? What needs to remain sacred? in your processes from a food economy?
Well, we think of a couple things.
Yeah.
I mean, one is just nutritional content.
Yeah.
And then the great thing about nutritional content is it actually correlates highly with flavor. So the more of a flavor punch something packs, generally speaking, the higher certain nutrients are spiking in that crop. So flavor, nutrition, food safety. So we have a team that is dedicated to food safety. We have control over that in a way that's never been possible before. Because we have so much control, this is the first time in the history of agriculture that the field itself is food safety certified. So rather than it having to go to a pack house and get washed in bleach and saline, the field itself is food safe certified. So we think, make sure that the nutritional value is there, make sure that it is craveable so that nutrient-rich food is the first thing that's desired. It's not the thing you should eat, but the thing you want to eat. So that's how we think about it.
Great. So Walter, over your 40 years of retail experience, you've seen the consumer.
I don't get to answer the sacred question.
Well, you can. Do you have an answer?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I
Okay,
want to say
go
something
for
about
it.
that. This is the tribal elder here, I guess.
Tribal knowledge.
Tribal elder, yeah. I'd say. What I want to see remain sacred here is in this, and we're going to talk later about the interchange between technology and food, but
where I was going.
is to remember that food is sacred. I love the word that you chose because it is a communion of sorts. It is a place where people gather. It's a place where people connect. And what's been lost over the last number of years is sort of humanity of food, right? What it means for the growers, what it means for the communities, what it means for the environment, what it means for the climate, what it means for the world in general, what it means in the whole economy. And to this idea of sitting down together and enjoying a meal, that you slow down enough, you actually taste the food you're eating. It's not some sort of function that you do, but it's something that's actually where people are connecting. So in all of this evolution of the food system, will we remember what we've discovered in some ways the last couple of years, that food really does matter? What it is, where it comes from, how it's grown, how it affects our health. Those are wonderful discoveries, right? But will we remember the ultimate thing of the humanity of food, or the connection of food, and that is a sacred function of food. So thank you for letting me respond.
Absolutely.
What was
Carla,
your-
you want
sorry.
anything on the?
I'm going to let you be the boss.
Okay. So I'm going to come back to you. If you think about the evolution of the consumer
Right.
Over your 40 years plus in retail, and technology, and the opportunity to position technology, if you think about the consumer's reaction to technology in cars or electronics or the medical field, but when you start to talk about technologies and putting that in our bodies, it's a different conversation. And for us the opportunity to really create a demand and pull for all of our products, what's the answer there? What's the silver bullet? What advice would you give?
Well, the answer is we don't know. I mean, we don't need to be Luddites about this and sort of saying, well, we can't do this, because we know the $10 billion, we have to solve for that. So, and we're going to solve for that, and it's already happening. The thing is, the customer hasn't yet weighed in on UMA's product or somewhat on Matt's product, but ultimately these will be part of what's offered up. And the question is, how do these brands go to market? Does the brand lead with technology? Does the brand lead with the food? How do those two join together? Yeah. And second of all, what are the guide rails around all of that, the production of that? I think some of the things we've seen with technology, the technology companies general today, suggest we'd be well advised to have a proactive conversation about what are the guardrails around all this as it evolves. What are the ethical considerations? What are the sort of guidelines that we could adopt and think about to guide this and help this and support this happening? So I don't yet know. I mean, I think most customers, we had a little conversation with Uma last night, right? And she, are people willing to put technology in their body? I don't know. I mean, probably there's going to be some concerns there, right? GMO maybe being an early harbinger of how people may respond to something they don't quite understand. And most customers today are very confused about what they're eating, what to eat. What do I eat? I don't know. It's confusing. Yeah. Help me out. So I think it's one that it's going to iterate, it's going to evolve. But I think the story, along with the technology, I would lead with the story, lead with the nutrients, lead with the nutrient density, lead with the taste, lead with the flavor, lead with those sorts of things, and back it up. The technology is an enabler or a capability of that. In the case of like James, what he does is appeal. He's figured out from food waste, and he's created a compound, an organic compound, recognized as organic, which he applies to the product, the fruit or vegetable, and extends shelf life 4 to 6 weeks. Think about that in terms of the potential in the marketplace, making food accessible to the issue you opened up with. The communities that don't have access to fresh food now have access through his technology and others to be able to do that. So, you know, I think it's to be determined. We don't yet know, and a lot of folks are doing these things without really thinking about. There's going to be a store customer. Well, an online customer is going to say, "What am I buying it? How does this make sense? Do I really want to do this? Do I want to feed this to my kids?" And I think there's a whole set of questions there yet to be answered.
Yeah,
May I build?
absolutely.
So sometimes I think about, I was an ecology major, but I've forgotten a lot of my science. I think it's Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Who knows the Newton laws? Is that number 3? And I think that sometimes in times when, well, we see this anthropologically, in times where there's a high increase in some kind of new technology emerging, as it relates to what people want for things that are very personal and intimate for themselves, like food, they actually go the opposite way as well at the same time. So we're living in a time of thriving technology, and at the same time we're living in a time where organic food is growing at the fastest rate in the entire food sector, right? And so I think that one is that sometimes the answer to technology is simplicity. And some people will be looking for that from us. And so that always brings companies like mine to thinking about transparency. Because if you want to know your food is simple, you want to be able to believe you know what's in it. You want the labels to be clear. You want them to be from companies that are credible. And that's a different place where we need to apply the technology. Some of us were listening to the earlier conversation with the CEOs talking about blockchain and other systems of making sure that you're able to know when you buy that box of, well, I'm going to be selfish, Annie's macaroni and cheese off the grocery store shelf, where did it come from and what is in it? And so I think we're going to have to accelerate the ability for people to participate in that piece where they can trust, understand, and know what's in their food. And that's really where that sacred question comes from. Why do we care about the sacredness of food? There's nothing more intimate than food. We put it inside of ourselves. So even while these guys are bringing incredible, needed technical solutions, the reason there's a tension is because people don't understand it exactly, and food is so primal. We want to understand it. So that's, I think, where we need to also advance, is how to make the systems scalable to be transparent.
That's great. So Matt, what story are you telling to the consumer that drives the pull for your product?
Yeah, well, so this phenomena is I mean, it's very human. It's what we do. We know what we know, and we're familiar with what we know, and we're not comfortable with what we're not familiar with. And so in 1893, the tractor was invented, and in 1893, the tractor was protested against, as it was until around 1920 here and there. And in 1915, it was still only on 5% of farms, and in 1950, just barely over 50%. So we now know it was an essential technology to get us what we need. So what we're doing is we're working to make sure that we don't fall into the trap that companies like, say, a Monsanto have fallen into, where it is black box science, and people aren't going to trust black box science. And plus, we're also not in the business of genetically modifying plants. We instead modify the environment. So we are, people. The job of farmer is changing. The job of grower is changing. It is now a computer scientist. It's now the flavor team. It's now the sensory team. It's now the plant scientist. It's the mechanical engineer. So just like the job of doctor has changed over the 20th century, now so is the farmer, and that's really all it is. And so what we are working to do is to help people get inside of Plenty, understand that we're people trying to make better food for people. And not trying to hide what it is that we do, because there's nothing that's scary about it. It just produces better food.
And what's the reaction been?
So to the extent that there is skepticism, here's a journey that happens. 3-star Michelin chefs, or we'll just say Michelin starred chefs generally, come to the farm skeptical, often even swearing, right? I don't even like the greenhouse produce I get. This must be worse, right? And then they spend an hour in the farm raving about how it's the best they've ever had, or I'll buy every strawberry you ever grow, or you've mastered terroir. Like those, the magical terroir, which is, the minerals and the environment and everything else. So once people put it in their mouth, skepticism melts away, because I think that at some level people then understand we are people working to make better food for people. It's nothing more than that.
That's awesome. Great. Uma, what's your story? How do you inspire customers to ultimately buy your product?
I think tasting is believing, and before that, hearing about it and seeing, how the products look, I think is opening your mind. But it really is at the point of tasting, and when we've done hundreds of these tastings for whether it's beef products or chicken or duck or other things, it just blows people's minds away that okay, you're actually tasting meat, not a meat alternative. And they start thinking about the memories that it kind of touches off on their taste buds, that this is the most tender, juicy, or moist product that they've had. And it's been a universal response from chefs, master chefs, or investors or media. So one of the things we started doing is letting a lot of people come and see the product, taste the product. And when we were 6 months old as a company with only 4 people, we brought the Wall Street Journal, and that was our debut moment to the wall. It was scary because this was a completely nuts and bolts numbers paper that's coming and talking about our technology. But I think we've got to do that. That's number one. And I think number two is there's a lot of things that we take for granted. We take that the food on the plate right now is healthy, and that's the gold standard, and it's not. Like as a physician, when you look at it, a third of the people in this room will die of heart disease, a third will die of cancer. Why is that happening? None of these products we're talking of technology are still on your plate, but it's still happening, right? Because we still don't know what we're putting in our mouth. And that's the part I think we've got to really be able to communicate well, saying there's an enormous opportunity to continue to improve food. And then lastly, this is going to take some time. It's really important to communicate this, that what we're doing is looking at the demand and also saying we could take off a little pressure off the supply that has to come from a method that will not scale to that degree. It scaled very well for the last 100 years. When you start thinking of the next 100, 200 years, people would want to see where their food is coming from, locally or globally. And I think that becomes very important to communicate, that no jobs are going to be lost. A farmer or rancher who's raising animals right now will have to continue to raise that, but they won't be able to meet the demand that's coming. Therefore, adopting technology, just like when ice first came, I'll give another analogy like Matt said, tractors were protested. But when refrigerated ice came, people just protested it, and there was like enormous amounts of unhappiness from the incumbent industry. But at that point, they didn't see that there would be that kind of demand. But we're in different days. Right now, if you talk to anyone in the meat industry, they see the demand is exploding, and production practices need to be augmented. So this is a and, not or solution. It's a big tent, and we need many solutions on the table.
That's good. So organics, the organic food trend, organic foods are growing 6 times the rate of the rest of the food market.
Yay.
I know, you'd be excited about that. But if you look at conversion, it takes anywhere from 3 to 7 years, 4.5 on average, not in Matt's operation, obviously. But how do we accelerate this speed of conversion?
Right.
Carla?
Well, what is critical is to be in partnership with farmers, growers, farming communities, ranchers. Walter talked about that, about the need to remember that this is really cultural. This is communities and people. And so in order to scale the conversion, we have to try to figure out how can we reduce the burdens in some of the communities that we're asking to participate in a new form of agriculture that might not be kind of the practice that's habituated in those communities. One of the things we also know is we have to help make economic sense for farmers, because farmers aren't going to we can't ask farmers to do something, they're in a business, right? We can't ask them to do something that doesn't make economic sense. So for General Mills, you may know we just announced our commitment. We announced a commitment to help drive the conversion of 1 million acres of conventionally farmed land into the practices that use these regenerative agriculture techniques. Just quickly, if you're not up on regenerative agriculture, it's really an approach to agriculture that is inspired by the organic movement, but really talks about what are the outcomes, not only what are the inputs. So to know that something is managed using regenerative agriculture practices, we're looking to increase the amount of carbon in the soil. We're looking to improve the water table. We're looking to improve farmer economics and the economics of farming communities. And we're looking to increase the amount of topsoil and the the micro and macronutrient biodiversity. So it's outcomes-based. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to start little pilots. We're partnering with organizations like the Nature Conservancy and Kiss the Ground and organizations that are in those farming communities to say we would like to lend and fund some support to figure out where that community is right now in its ability to start introducing more pollinator habitat or cover crops or things that can start to change those systems so that the available agriculture land is there to meet the demand.
That's great. So under your leadership, organics went from niche to mainstream. You saw that transition happen. What's your, and it can be very controversial at times, organic versus conventional, at least in the farming space. What tribal wisdom do you want to impart on us in terms of where we've been and where we're heading with the whole organic movement?
Well, I thought we could turn this room into an organic greenhouse.
Well, we can do that.
I'm sprouting right now.
We need to turn the heat up a little bit.
Well, listen, let's remember that organic really, it didn't really, until the I was telling Sanjeev this last night. Do you guys remember the Alar crisis? Those of you who are older in the room, when it hit, when CBS 60 Minutes ran that piece on Alar and apples, all of a sudden everybody came in for organic apples. So some of what this happens is serendipity and or when something happens where people have to think again about what food means in their body. That was written, but I think the real driver was when we put the standard in place. We started working on that in the late 80s. It was finally turned into law in 2000. And once that seal was in place, it provided a standard that really allowed the marketplace to bloom. So markets need guidelines, then free markets can go to work and grow that, and that's what's happened. So I think we're seeing, IMC the same numbers you are. The organic's probably $60 billion, $65 billion, depends on how you count it, and it's growing, double-digit compounded the last 5 years. Those are real economic numbers. There's a real demand out there for the product, and as far as I can tell, it's as far as the eye can see, because it's now moving into different channels besides just grocery stores. It's moving institutional. It's moving in directions where demand is pulling it through. So that being said, the organic standard itself at the federal government level has gone backwards under the current administration, unfortunately, and the standard itself is not keeping up with how folks are thinking about agriculture, organic agriculture, and that's unfortunate because at some point that results in a disconnect between the customer and what the standard stands for. That's got to get addressed, so we need some movement on the part of the regulators to move that along and create a more robust, dynamic standard that's going to allow for some of the things that are being talked about. That being said, oftentimes organic also is, I'm also a big advocate of more sustainable agriculture in whatever form it takes. So, by the way, we should all shout out to Carla on what General Mills has done. That's a 1 million acre commitment to say we'll take the output of the farms. Because I can tell you, farmers had 4 down years in a row. I was just in Pueblo, Colorado. They're suffering. They are not making. They're not making ends meet. I said, "What do you make here?" He said, "I make $30,000 Now he works cash flow and all that depreciation, but we're not making a lot of money. They are having a hard time. They're looking for somewhere to get out of the commodity cycle and get into something where they can get a premium for their time and for their work. So we don't value farmers in general, but in particular right now, farmers are really having a hard time. So how do we grow organics? One, maybe we rethink what farming means to us as a society and think differently about that, just like we need to do with teachers. Number 2, we need to up the standard so that the regulation provides a sort of dynamism that I think. 3, we need to continue to promote the attributes of organic without being critical of other methods of production. 4th is kind of incentivize more sustainable production in whatever form it takes. Right? Anybody that's moving in an incremental positive direction is helping things to happen. But against the backdrop of climate change, the fact that we're using 4.7 pounds of soil for every pound of food we eat every year right now.
Absolutely.
So it's not like we got forever. So that being said, I think, I don't know if that answers your question.
Walter, I want to add on to something, and I know you're passionate about this because I know how Whole Foods operates and operated under your leadership, because I don't want to forget about the people. I don't want to forget about the shopper, the consumers, the communities who we're talking about. Why do we need to grow how much organics are eaten? Because we want more people to participate. And I actually think Whole Foods has been an inspiring beacon of really appreciating the diverse spectrum of people who are interested in eating this way. But I would challenge that our industry has not. And so that is something that I also think what needs to change. Well, do we have the right people in the conversation? Because I don't know how to expand organics and make them relevant to maybe all the single moms who are, living in urban centers, or maybe the rural people who don't have a Whole Foods within 60 miles and, they can't wait for the Amazon package drop or whatever. I'm interested in a radical opening of the conversation to start having voices that are not currently in retail leadership, in corporate leadership, in sustainability leadership, and in regulatory leadership. Because I don't think we're hearing all the answers because we're not talking to all the people.
And what is it going to take to make the farmer a hero, or the people that grow the food heroes? What's the unlock?
Well, I don't know about that, but you make such a great point about come back to that, such a great point about the diversity. Because organic, that's often one of those examples where people answer the question about the 10 million people. Organic will never get you there because it's not affordable. People can't access it. It's a lot more affordable than it was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. People forget that conventional agriculture was subsidized 100% by the federal government. The federal government barely researches organic, and it's all been done on the ground, from the ground up by farmers, right? So if the same set of tools were applied, perhaps it would accelerate and become more accessible, and that's not a reason to not continue. So some of that is around, but it's a fair point that it should be available to all people.
Absolutely.
At Whole Foods, we personally build 4 stores in the inner city of America. Detroit, Newark, New Orleans, and the south side of Chicago, where people said it would never work. And I'm going to tell you, those folks in those communities, and they're primarily minority communities, they want the same set of choices. Mm-hmm. They may make their own set of choices, but they want the same set of choices. So at some point, the food, again, represents this, the organic food in particular, raises up the question of racism, elitism, disparities that we need to confront. Absolutely. Because health, food, should be accessible to everyone and to every community. It's not right now. No. So that's a whole other set of issues to talk about. How we make the farmer the heroes. We did a thing one time at Whole Foods where we put them on baseball cards. And we started handing the baseball cards. Here's farmer, here's the farmer, which kind of was fun. I don't think we're still doing it, but that's one sort of way. But it's more of a societal and a cultural shift as food moves into the 15% of the economy, and the connection to health really emerges, which is what Mike Milken's really being committed to now. We've got to consider how to do that in a better way. You tell me, I don't know.
Exactly.
I'll say, so I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin. It was in orchard crops like cherries and apples. When I left the farm, I intended to never come back to the farm. In part because I wouldn't have said it this way when I left the farm, but we didn't have any control over our livelihood. And that made certain parts of growing up pretty tough. And that's because agriculture is a manufacturing business over which you have very little control and get 1/6 of the price that customers ultimately pay at the register for bearing most of the risk in the supply chain. So it's a very tough part of the value chain to execute in, and it's why here in America the farmer is almost 60. It's why in Korea the farmer is 67. It's why in Japan the farmer is 69. It's because as economies have opened up new professions where you have some modicum of control of your livelihood, people have opted for those careers.
Exactly.
And to a point Carla was making earlier, where we maybe only have 60 topsoil cycles left, 60 years worth of seasons. And Howie Buffett has just recently written a book around the concept that a farmer has roughly 40 chances in a lifetime, 40 growing seasons in a lifetime, which is itself a systematic constraint on innovation in the industry.
That's right.
Now as you impose control over the growing system and free yourself of some of those constraints, we're now getting 40 growing cycles in a year, and which allows us just to spin more cycles.
Yeah.
And so I think part of this is it's a tool set for the grower to allow more iteration cycles in a career.
That's great.
But we at Plenty on the issue of organics, we have right now what we understand is the only organically certified indoor farm in the world, and But we're focused on something that goes even beyond that, which is, hey, customers are saying we don't want to put chemicals in our body. To the topic we were talking about before, people don't want to put technology in their mouth. They don't want to put pesticides, chemicals in their mouth. So we are growing with no pesticides, which goes above and beyond even organic. And we hope to see that spread throughout the industry, because we believe that is better for the gut biome, it's better for health, it's better for the immune system.
That's great.
And will lead to better health outcomes.
Good. I'm going to turn it over to you for questions. Before I do that, vertical farming going to be mainstream?
It will be,
Okay.
for certain.
Okay.
It's a matter of making it comfortable for people.
Sure. Cell-based meat, mainstream?
Absolutely, but there's a timeline for it, right?
Yep.
You want to start off introducing the customer in the next few years, but after that, it's an enormous pipeline of development that everybody in this room would want to get behind and want to have on the table.
Great. Good. Yeah.
Hey, Lance
Hey.
Price, Milken Institute School of Public Health. I'm really excited about the new technologies and everything you've been talking about. Can we talk about the other end, though? And that is the packaging. And think about the oceans, and a large percentage of the plastics that are going to the oceans are related to food. And so what kind of food packaging revolutions are we talking about? Are you guys talking about in your companies? And can you point us towards a future where our organic foods are not in a package that lasts forever in the environment?
Yeah. I'll touch on it a little bit, and then I will also say, if you are interested in this, please know General Mills has a very thorough social responsibility report online, generalmills.com, where you can see our approach to packaging, energy, everything all in detail, and in real simple, nice graphic ways. We have been for, I think, even 15, 20 years working on with the fiber-based industry, because of course we're the cereal company, right? We're Cheerios, we're your Betty Crocker cake mix company, we're your old El Paso taco kits. We use a lot of fiberboard and cardboard, and almost 100% of the fiber and the fiberboard in our boxes for a decade have been 100% post-consumer use recycled stuff. And so one of the things that we realize, though, is that the recycling industry is a huge piece of this equation, and I'll get to that in a second. Then what we have plastic in cereal liners, plastic on sleeves on things like your granola bars, et cetera. You are going to still want your granola bar in some kind of sleeve. I don't think you're going to throw that in your gym bag and just like let it float around. But what we can do is talk about how can we incorporate more plant-based technologies into the materials we use in order to keep your food safe, in order to keep your food in the condition you expect it to taste like when you eat it, right? Because if you open up that granola bar and you thought it was going to be crunchy and it's soggy, you're going to care more about the fact that you wasted your money than that we used a plant-based product. So we have to do those technologies sort of in parallel. And on our Cascadian farm liners in our cereal and in our Annie's liners in some of our boxes, we are already incorporating plant-based into the approach of developing waterproof containers. The thing I would say, and I bet Walter's going to be the big-time expert on this, but we have to also talk about import-export policy, our relationships with other markets like China, because one of the issues with recycling is, first of all, people don't recycle. I don't know the statistics. It's less than 10% of all recyclable materials ever get recycled. We have to make that easier in municipal systems. Then we have to understand, once we collect those materials, who's going to turn them into something, and then how's that demand cycle going to pull back? Because I don't think we'll ever be at a place. I love these experiments, like there's zero plastics grocery stores opening up. I love some of these pilots I've heard about. I don't know if it's a Kickstarter of like, I give you my yogurt cups and you'll give me some yogurt back in a week. I really like that. But the truth is, if we're going to serve the masses, most people are busy raising their children, trying to get on the bus, to go to work, and we can't make it cumbersome if we want people to participate. Yeah. So what I think is, it's a collection of the willing that has to all come around this issue, including how we help consumers make it easier for them to participate.
Walter?
On packaging?
Thoughts? Yeah, on thoughts on packaging, what you've seen?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of brands working on packaging that you can actually eat. So you can eat the packaging as part of the product. We'll see how that works out. But I think, Whole Foods is a team that's thinking about how do they make, what the best way to do it is to get the manufacturers together, collaborate, and think about steps that can be taken together. I don't think, I haven't seen a moonshot on this yet. I think it's going to happen more step by step as people say, let's embrace more responsibility in the production of things. But I will say it's a question that at Whole Foods there's 105,000 team members, about 65,000 are millennial now. So I will say that the question is definitely emerging to where people are saying, okay, what are you doing on this? And I think part of the answer any brand's going to have to answer is, tell me how you're doing this.
Yep.
I don't yet know how to solve for it, but I do know that it's got to be part of the consideration set as you build a brand today in terms of how you do that.
Especially if you can't sacrifice food safety along the way, for sure.
Correct.
So, great, yeah.
First of all, hi, I'm Andrea Feinberg. I'm a physician. The panel's been great. I'm wondering about how we can use food to really have a healthier future. So maybe this is more for Uma and for Matt. How do we use our foods, and are your meats healthier than other meats? Because we know Americans succumb to heart disease, and there are lots of studies that talk about being plant forward. So how are you two thinking about making our food really much healthier for Americans globally?
Well, the way that we think about it at Plenty is again, we have to make nutrient-rich, healthy foods craveable. Like, you just got to make people love them and desire them and make them compete with junk food, with industrially flavored food that is divorced from the nutrients that our brains typically associate with flavor. So an example is, for example, you take kale. And let's go back a second. The most effective pharmaceutical for lowering blood sugar lowers blood sugar by a little over a point. Kale, it doesn't take many servings of kale a week to lower your blood sugar 2.5 points with no side effects. That 1 point drop, by the way, drives an $8,000 per person reduction in healthcare costs for those with obesity and diabetes, which is roughly 5 to 8% of our GDP, depending on whose numbers you use. So that is how you make it healthier, I think, is by making it more flavorful. I mean, you make people want it, and that's how we become healthier.
On the meat side, we have very low-hanging fruit we can go after because we're detaching meat production from
Is anybody low-hanging meat?
I know, I was going to ask him about that.
Yes, look, we don't actually have a slaughterhouse anymore, so there's no...
That's right.
So because we're detaching meat production from slaughter, one of the lowest hanging fruit is decreasing the chances of contamination getting into the meat supply. And when you don't have the same degree of risk as E. coli or Yersinia or Salmonella getting into the meat, I think you really start thinking about much more security in the whole supply chain. And that's the low-hanging fruit. The second part of it is because we're picking cells with the nutrient qualities we need, and we can do an analysis of the food right away, I think the opportunity to find foods that are lower inflammatory potential, maybe better fatty acid profiles, and also to start thinking about what kinds of foods can be customized for people that may want higher protein requirements or lower protein. I mean, as a physician, for chronic kidney disease, the first prescription you write is low-protein diet. It takes away meat from their diet for the most part. But you can actually have meat with lower protein content as we start developing this technology. So I think it just opens up an entire box of tools. But as with food or claims, you can't make claims until you've been able to actually do those studies. And to my knowledge, there's really never been any study in food that has claims that are actually possible to back up, because food is continuously evolving and moving towards a different degree of production. So we've got to think about maybe some of the fundamental underpinnings of how do you decrease contamination that relates to food poisoning? How do you have a better fatty acid profile that, based on studies we know, will help in cardiovascular disease? And can you identify personalized attributes of large degrees of population that would do much better with certain levels of proteins in their diet? So I think it's a combination of those tools. It's not a straightforward answer.
Great. Right behind you.
Thank you. Yeah, Walter mentioned going beyond consumers into institutions. I was wondering if you could all name an institution that you've been impressed by on the food front, making people healthier. Dr. Feinberg made a food pharmacy at Geisinger. Any things like that that you think are good for individuals and populations?
Great. Institutions.
I can name FAIR. FAIR is in the room. FAIR has been working nonstop on this, of saying you have to have, cost. Can you just, or Rosie, just say really quick what FAIR is doing? I think it might be helpful.
FAIR is a coalition of institutional investors worth over $12 billion for private sector, working on the risks
you should definitely connect. It's an incredible group that's working in this area.
Great.
So I'll give you another example is Stanford Hospital. You know, I mean, if you've been to the hospital, and I don't recommend it, but the food is nasty, and there's a 100% disconnect between food and health there, and when in fact it should be the exact opposite. And there's a few progressive hospitals, Kaiser in Oakland, Stanford in the Bay Area, and other places where they've begun to actually allow you know, they're using local food in their procurement practices, and they're beginning to shift it to where you can have actually healthy food as an option as part of your recovery plan, right? There's new companies like Territory, you heard from yesterday, and Hungry, based in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia, that are Uberizing local chefs to produce healthy food for the marketplace. That in one case, is individual meal, so for the food tribes can get their meals according to their food tribe. In the case of Hungry, that the office catering manager has an opportunity to get locally for source food in terms of on that, using the modern technology platform. So institutions, nursing homes, my God, if you've been to a nursing home, you know, it's like gruel, it's just slop, and it's just disgusting. And I mean, honestly, I have to you know, rip on the government. I did talk to the USDA Deputy Secretary. I said, you know, you guys take the commodity stuff that you can and you put it into the school system, and you pay them $1.30 a day per kid for the meal, and then you wonder why we have the learning outcomes and different things like that. So institutions, people forget about beyond grocery stores that there's all these other places where people consume food, and these are all opportunities to introduce a healthier way of thinking about things. And that's why I say we're at this point where people haven't woken up to the fact that we're actually talking about food again, which it's sexy. You're in a pretty sexy spot, right?
I know I am.
Right? And so now everybody's listening. Now we can go back and look at some of these things we've just taken for granted the last 70 years.
Yeah. I would also offer Brighter Bites, based out of Texas, amazing program that's dealing with access. And Brighter Bites, fantastic, and they're using science and actually looking at the biome of kids and their learning, and it's changing the families, and they're basically creating communities of health. Sounds like you know them already based on your nodding, so that's great. We have one more question at the back, and then we'll close out. Yeah, hi.
Ron Finley. So we got the government, they supported agriculture that is killing us and the planet, what they call it commercial. So how do we get the government to support agriculture that's not killing us, organic?
Yeah. We go to the Hill every year during Organic Week, I can say that. And we learned that very strongly from some of these little small startups we acquired at General Mills. You know, we acquired Annie's, and we acquired Larabar, and we acquired Epic. And those founders were beating the streets on the Hill, knocking on doors, talking about what they needed from the Farm Bill, representing the farmers and the growers, what they needed. And our big 150-year-old company is listening to the new voices inside. And so whatever week, I got it on my calendar, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C., going to meet state by state with the people who are making these rules and explaining that, hey, we're the second largest branded manufacturer of organic foods in the U.S., in North America, in fact. General Mills is. So you already listened to me because I have plants and manufacturing locations and teams and votes in all your districts. But now you need to understand I also care about how you're regulating organics. And as Walter said, we need to evolve it. We need to protect research in the Farm Bill. So we're doing it by trying to go right where the decisions are made.
And I would say we're doing the same at Plenty, and also I'll say that there's there are positive signs, right? If you look at what's happening to the sugar companies of the world, regardless of whether they're producing confections, sugar water, or condiments, the market value of those companies has, as a class or as a cohort, been shrinking. So we're showing our voice with our wallets. And this is it's a world where for all of human history we've been working to solve calories per dollar. Now we need to solve for nutrients. Nutrients have always been the luxury. We've now largely solved for calories, and now there's a quality and distribution problem we have to solve. So let's solve for the nutrients. So now that voice that we're voicing with our wallet, we just have to also voice with our votes, and just help our representatives know that now we care about how healthy we are.
So you guys don't know who asked the question, but that's Ron Finley. He's doing something extraordinary in LA by basically organizing in neighborhoods for people to grow food. And so part of the answer to your question, Ron, is yourself, more of yourselves, of people who take individual action to do something about it. But what I would say is, it may come no secret to everybody that Washington, D.C. is not the center of innovation right now. And that really what I get excited about is these food policy councils that are starting to emerge. They got different names in different cities, but LA's got a very robust one. Detroit has a very robust one, where the community members are coming together and articulating kind of an approach to think about zoning, to think about tax credits, to think about it in a way that supports a more healthier, more robust food system. And I think that finds its way back up to D.C. eventually. Cindy Debris Stabenow is a good friend of mine, said, look, we're not going to get it done on the first go in D.C., but if things are happening in cities and states and counties and they're coming to Washington, we're going to read the tea leaves and something's going to happen. It may be down the road, but there's the laboratories of democracy are in the cities, counties, and states, and there are some very amazing things happening that I think will help us to shape a more robust future.
And they're influential.
I do know about Mr. Finley's work. Thank you for being here, and I saw your work last year. Your question is right. I mean, we have to be able to voice our work very obviously, in DC, but I think food is also going from just producing it for survival to actually to thriving. I think making that distinction is really important, and we've done that. And look, for a company like ours with minimal resources, we have fantastic investors, but still very small in the big scheme of things. But we were in DC multiple times in the last 9 months, and for the first time ever, we had both the major agencies that regulate food in the country, FDA and USDA, work together, come together for a public meeting in October last year. Between October and March, they did a lot of work behind the scenes, and both of them came out and put a pathway for us to get to market. And that's never happened in the history of the government, of working agencies that fast, in the face of a lot of questions that still need to be answered. But the clear thing that DC is hearing is we need innovation to move this forward. And it's important to have many approaches available. So yeah, just like you motivated a number of us to pursue this, I think that's the answer here.
But do you think you'll ever get organic to be sponsored, to be by the government like commercial would? I mean, I think that would be a goal, and I think that's the way we can get some younger farmers in here, because we're about to be
Yep.
Defarmed.
That's great, yeah. Great point.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to close this down. One quick comment from each of you. What are you absolutely certain about? Matt, what are you absolutely certain?
Well, I'm certain that people are going to look at fruits and vegetables a lot more than they do today. I'm certain we're going to be eating proteins of all sorts from different sources over the next 10 years, and where people's food comes from over the next 10 years, they're going to be stunned at how fast it changes.
Great. Walter, what are you absolutely certain?
That I'm certain that individuals and businesses, if properly inspired and are going to make this sort of future that we can imagine more inclusive, more involved, more democratic, more healthier.
Great. What are you absolutely certain
Keep
about?
it simple. Better meat, better world.
Great. Carla, what are you absolutely certain about?
I'm certain that a wave of change is coming, and it's coming from the people, and it's going to be phenomenal. Let's get ready, and let's be with it.
That's awesome. Let's do it, and let's thank our panelists. Great. Thank you. Yeah, let's get ready to rumble.